Hello, everyone. Welcome to this venue, which is going to be this venue for the rest of this session, and welcome to the new session. For anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Margaret Green. I'm the present president. If you've got any questions, just come and ask me. I won't be able to promise to help you, but I'll try. You see, we've got a sign-in sheet, and it's a kind of, because this is kind of Glasgow Life and the university, we're using a sign-in sheet each time. So just to warn you that will be one next time you come, which I hope will be at the next meeting. So I would like to start. This is probably some of you will know the Jim Morrison, who was a good friend of mine and who came to all the meetings. And Jim Morrison died in August, and this is just a wee tribute to him. He was from Aberdeen. Now, if anybody knew him, he didn't lose his Aberdeen accent, and he had a northeast sense of humour. But he'd lectured, he went to university at Aberdeen, and then he did I've got it written down so I can remind me of it. He came to Glasgow University, he did a PhD, and then he did a short time in Stanford University and came back to Glasgow and lectured in Glasgow microbiology, and his speciality was the herpes virus, research into that. But he really got interested in geology, and he was introduced to the Geological Society about 1986, I think it's, or 1980s anyway. He became a member of the Geology Society. He was the meeting secretary for about 25 years, and he was the president for 3 years as well. He got interested in geology, and part of it was sort of the Northwest Highlands and the West Highlands. He was also very interested in local geology, but he took up sea kayaking. Now, seemingly that's a really good way to see geology, but when Jim started it, he had just not really got into it properly, and I think I had a few tumbles before I realised how you could what you call row a sea kayak. He did a sort of lecture one time about it and about sort of camping on various deserted beaches and having various adventures. So sea kayaking can be recommended a way of finding about the geology. So as I say, he was a member of the Geological Society. He was also a member of the Geoconservation Group, which at the moment I'm chairing. And he's taken us on a few sort of walks around about Glasgow. So he was also interested in Glasgow's geology. He had a very sort of broad interest of geology. And it's just that he's been a friend of ours for quite a long time. I just thought I'd give a wee tribute to him. So there are a couple of announcements. One is that we are looking for a new member of council, which is the committee that runs the society. So if anybody's really interested in it, we've already had a volunteer tonight. So anybody's interested in it, please let me know, or email the secretary or anything if you're interested in. We'd like somebody to join the council. It's a sort of initially a 3-year tenure, shall we say, and you can stay on after that. And if you're really keen, there's lots of things you can help out with, like, sort of social information and minute taking, and also, there's a variety of things, but you don't have to go straight into that. You can be given a sort of gentle introduction to it. The other thing is that for anybody who's interested, there's a Scottish Journal of Geology. Now, you can get that through your membership online, but if anybody wants a hard copy of it, like this, which it's full of all great illustrations, colour and everything, and there's articles in it from members of the society. Neil, have you got an article in this time? I know this one has, but that's last year's. And Gary's got them. So this is... if anybody wants, just let us know, and you can get it through Edinburgh, and they'll just mail you a copy. £10, by the way. It's not exactly expensive. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce Katie. So This is Katie. Katie's a geologist. She's got a degree and a Master of Research from Glasgow University and a PhD from Durham University. And so she's worked in the museum and heritage sector and has research interests in the... Hiya. Come in and... It's okay. So Katie is a curator of mineralogy and petrology in the Hunterian here, and a project geologist for the Eco Museum of the Scottish mining landscape. All right. She just dedicates most of her free time to volunteering. She's a very good volunteer, and is currently a trustee of the Scottish Geology Trust and the Fossil Grove, and is involved in the Scottish Geology Festival, which is still on at the moment over the last 5 years. So Katie's subject is Gilmore Hill and the buildings of the Gilbert Scott building, with topical snippets from Hunterian collections. So over to Katie. Thank you.
Okay, so can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? Cool. Right. Cool. Yeah, just give me a shout if you can't hear if the microphone cuts off or anything. But I also don't mind being interrupted for questions within reason. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk to you a bit about the University of Glasgow and how we went about building it and what materials we used. And this is currently an ongoing research project, so it's quite open-ended, and it's something that myself and a colleague are researching for next year, which is going to be Glasgow 575. So 575 years of the university. Obviously this year is Glasgow 850. But yeah, so we thought that it'd be really nice to actually look in more detail at the university and that history. So just for some geological context about why I love urban geology and building stones. So Scotland, obviously we all know Scotland has amazing geology, but for a country its size we have very varied geology, and that means we have very varied built heritage. And traditional buildings in Scotland, we have sort of one of the highest rates of traditional buildings, which is sort of pre-1919 buildings, which are usually made from local stone or Scottish stone. And you can see that when you travel around Scotland. So obviously you go to Aberdeen, you've got the Granite City. Around Glasgow, you've got your blonde and red sandstones that are sort of very iconic of Glasgow. And yeah, so Scotland, our geology basically has been very fundamental to our built heritage. And we've got a picture of Sicker Point here, just to do a bit of a plug. As Margaret said, the Geology Festival is still on until the 12th, but there is also a crowdfunder at the moment for the Hutton Tricentenary, which is next year, and we're trying to raise money to implement a deep time trail at Sicker Point. So I put a QR code there, but you can just Google Hutton crowdfunder. So I've done my job there, doing a little plug. Yeah, so in the context of the geology of where we're going to be looking at the university, it is a really simplified geological map showing the Midland Valley terrain where obviously Glasgow is situated. And I'm probably all aware of how important our geology was to Glasgow's sort of foundation and to the industry more widely in Scotland. So the rocks that we are on at the moment are Carboniferous in age, and Carboniferous deposits in the Midland Valley are where most of our coal deposits are. So we have exploited a lot of the rock types that you get within the Carboniferous, and that includes the coal, but also ironstones and the shales, and also sandstones and limestones as well. And sandstones obviously are what we have used predominantly for building in a lot of Glasgow and Edinburgh as well. And this map here is a map that was drawn to show the different drumlins. So obviously we've got our sort of bedrock geology, and we're talking over 300 million years old, and then you've got the super young stuff that I don't tend to look at too much, but it is interesting in the context of Gilmore Hill and the university, and that is because there is loads of drumlins. I think they mapped over 150 altogether around about Glasgow and the surrounding area, and a lot of the places in Glasgow that have hill in the name have hill in the name because they are on a drumlin, apart from Mary Hill. That is not named after a drumlin, that is named after somebody who's called Mary Hill. So yeah, the geology has had a sort of really lasting effect on not just the built heritage, but also, like, you know, where we have developed our sort of urban centres, and obviously where your kind of industrial centres are. And this is just to show you the kind of stratigraphy and where we are situated within your geological timeline when talking about the Carboniferous. So you can see there, about 359 to about 299 million years ago. And the work that I've been doing is with my colleague Joseph Sharples, who he has written a really great paper, and he's looked at the actual workers who built the Gilbert Scott building. So during lockdown, he did a project because he found this. It was an illuminated address, which was to John Thompson of Peterborough, who was one of the kind of contractors responsible for building the university. And within that, zoomed in on this nice detail here, are all the names of workers who signed this document. And what Joseph was able to do is actually go back and look through census records and things and look at just the scale of the number of people who were actually involved with the construction of the Gilbert Scott building. And I think he managed to identify over 100 workers in this project. One of the problems is, obviously, when you're looking at census records and things, that if people have the same names, or you know, they're not actually listed in the census for whatever reason. There was also a lot of movement of people at that time, and you know, workers may have been in shared accommodation, for example. So there is like some aspects that we're not able to really get much more information, but the fact that there was over 100 people that were able to identify through this, that Joseph was able to identify, is really cool. So what we're trying to do is actually tie together those two stories about the kind of history of the people that were involved, and also a bit about the geology as well. So that's our kind of long-term goal for this project. But you can get the paper if you just Google like Joseph Sharples and Gilbert Scott. It should bring up the paper, and it's open access as well. But it's definitely worth a read. But I'm not going to talk too much about that today, because obviously we all love rocks, so I'm going to talk about the rocks. So this image here is an old picture of Gilmore Hill House. So Gilmore Hill House was situated on the top of Gilmore Hill, and this is a painting that we have in our collections, our art collection. Sorry, I keep forgetting that's on me. I will try not to keep touching it. So yeah, this is an image showing Gilmore Hill before it was built on, and that was the view from Woodland Road, sort of looking up to Gilmore Hill. And on the left-hand side, you have Gilmore Hill House, which was a house that was situated on the site before they actually built the university building. And what I love about this image is you can actually see in the background that they were building the quadrangles of the university just around about the house that was there. And you can also see the absolutely huge blocks of masonry that are sitting in front of the house there. So that was demolished in 1870, which is when the university was getting moved to this site. And this is a geological map of the Gilmore Hill site. So we are down here where it says sort of Regent Mills, and where you can see the Western Infirmary. Here is where the old quarry was. So obviously this map is the geological map, and you can see where the coal has been mapped. And these maps were done at this scale, usually in these kind of industrial areas. So where we had economic resources that we could exploit, you will find that the geological surveys have done quite a lot of detailed mapping in these areas. So when we're looking at the sort of stone in the quarry and where they actually sourced the building materials from, when they were building the university, so Gilbert Scott, famous architect, he specified a lot of the materials. So quite often with jobs, they will actually specify in advance what stone they want used, you know, what lime mortar they want used, how they want it done. But before they were able to do that, they have to understand whether or not the stone that they want to use at the Gilmore Hill site, whether or not that was actually suitable for building and what was at that locality. So this is a section from an old book which talks about the different sort of specifications that were given for the building of the Gilbert Scott. And this is about a payment to John Young. So John Young was a curator here at the Hunterian, and he was very interested in sort of glacial geology in particular, but he also spent a lot of time looking at these kind of old quarries and, well, they weren't old at the time while they were being worked, and also sort of collieries and other coal-related sites. And when he was surveying the site at Gilmore Hill, he was paid £10 to log the section at Gilmore Hill. So this is from a paper that John Young published, which is in the Geological Society. It's in one of the Scottish journals, and this here is just a reconstruction of what he was doing, converted into centimetres, because fathoms, feet and inches are very confusing to work in. And so yeah, you can see what he's done there. Basically, he's gone through the sections of this quarry to just try and understand that stratigraphy. And why do we do that? So if you're not familiar with Carboniferous geology, one of the things about the Carboniferous is that we have these cycles of environmental conditions, and that means that you get these kind of cycles in the rocks and in the sediments that you see. And you can see that the sort of buff white areas there are the kind of massive sandstones. The black is your coal, and then you've got your shales and ironstones mixed in, and that is quite a typical sort of sequence in this part of the Carboniferous. And this is the limestone coal formation that we're sitting on. And confusingly, there's not really any limestone in the limestone coal formation. It is mostly just your deltaic sandstone, so huge big rivers, and your sort of coal and swampy brackish environments. And this is kind of what Scotland would have looked like at the time. So you can see where Scotland outline is superimposed onto this sort of reconstruction. It's a bit like the kind of Amazonian delta. So you had these highland areas, which were up kind of where our highlands are now. And you also had these huge big river systems, and you had your marine environment in the south. And this here is from the Daily Record from 1927, and the reason I put this here is so the Gilmore Hill quarry that I think was opened in sort of 1868. So when they were moving the university and they actually dug into the quarry, they uncovered 5 or 6 stems of fossilised trees. So when they actually did that and they dug it up, they sadly did not survive. They weathered away, and I think that's probably one because they were working the quarry, and 2, obviously we have Fossil Grove, and that was protected by the fact that they built a building on top of that. But this, I'm presuming it probably was more valuable for them to get that stone out there. But what's really cool is being able to look at old sort of newspaper archives and things and start to try and piece together a little bit more information, because obviously that site now, the quarry, is no longer accessible. And it's just a picture of Fossil Grove here to show you possibly what the floor of the Gilmore Hill quarry would have looked like. And it would have been really cool if I've not been able to find any drawings or anything of the trees that were there, which would be really nice. And you never know, we might come across some at some point. But yeah, it would be really nice if they'd actually kind of documented the trees. But apparently the spacing and things were very similar to how they are in the Fossil Grove. And from the collections, so within the Hunterian collections, we do have quite a lot of material from round about the university. And this is a block of sandstone, which is from Gilmore Hill Quarry. And you can see it's got this really nice banding on it. And there is another sample in the collection, which comes from Victoria Park, from the sandstone there, from where Fossil Grove is. And it looks almost exactly the same. And you have these sort of bands where you've got this kind of organic material in iron rich layers. And yeah, it's a really beautiful sandstone, but normally this is not the kind of sandstone I would look at and think would make a particularly good building stone. Normally when you're looking at stuff for, like, especially quite a prestigious building, you want what you would call ashlar stone, which is very high quality, usually very uniform in colour. So you normally wouldn't want it to be sort of bedded or banded like that, but that is what they had locally available. But I'm going to just talk a little bit about the sort of oldest part of the university. So just for the context of the reason they moved the university, so it was about 1870, they moved it from the High Street in town and moved it up to the West End to Gilmore Hill. And the only kind of original part of the university, the High Street, is the Lion and Unicorn staircase. And you can, if you go up to see this, you will notice that the per unicorn has had a replacement leg, and that is because of the sort of decay of this stone. So we know from records that the quarry that they sourced the stone for the High Street site was very local to there. We don't actually know exactly where it was, but it would have been in these carboniferous deposits. And the staircase was brought over stone by horse and cart, and so clearly it was a very important part, or quite symbolic part, of that university building that they wanted to retain. And then when they built the chaplaincy, they did turn the stairs the other way, so they kind of rebuilt those. And what's really nice is when you sort of walk up to see the unicorn, sort of just even over the last year, I've noticed that it is starting to weather really nicely in harmony with the original stone. So obviously it is going to look very stark at first. But the stone itself is quite similar to the stuff that they were using from Gilmore Hill. It had quite a lot of these big black fragments, so a lot of bits of carbonaceous material, plant material in there, and quite a lot of ripple laminations. So we know that there was, it was probably deposited by sort of a sort of river system. But the thing is, a lot of the stone has been face bedded, which means that rather than it being used in the way that it would be in the ground, the stairs and sort of the banister bits are sitting upright, and that means that all the moisture is basically going down all the planes of weakness in the stone, and is causing accelerated decay. But it is obviously a very old part of the university, so yeah, you can go and see that. It's up in Professor's Square. But the kind of fine detailing of the Gilbert Scott building, they didn't just source that locally. So it's quite common in construction that you would use whatever was local or sort of poorer quality for your main masonry, so for your main walling. Any of your kind of fine details, you really need to have a high quality stone or a fine grained sandstone, and that is so that you can actually get your stone carved to get all the nice finishes, like around windows and doors in particular. And the stone that they sourced for this was specified, and it came from up in Bishop Briggs. So Bishop Briggs, at one point there was a load of quarries up in Bishop Briggs. You can see this map here. It's got some of them highlighted there. Most of them I think now are actually built over, so they're now sort of housing estates or not accessible. But these were a very popular source of this higher quality stone, and the thing is that you could, because Bishop Briggs is north of here, you could just put it on the canal and bring it down, or onto the sort of mineral line railways. And there was another quarry, though, so the south of Glasgow, they also did bring some stone. We know from the Giffnock quarries, which are to the south of Glasgow, obviously, around Giffnock. Quite often the stone that came from Bishop Briggs was also referred to as Giffnock stone, because it was from the same kind of horizon, and it was a very similar in quality sandstone. And yeah, it's quite, like, when you look back at these old maps, and you can really appreciate just quite how huge the scale of quarrying was. So you can see they have literally just marked quarries in Giffnock sandstone. They've not really actually identified all of the individual ones, just because there would have been so many in operation. And obviously nowadays we don't really quarry any stone for masonry in Scotland. There has been a lot of repairs that they've had to do to the Gilbert Scott building, particularly in recent years. And this is something that we will see more of with climate change. So as we are getting more extreme temperatures, increased moisture, and obviously in Scotland we have a lot of rain, in particular wind-driven rain is the biggest issue. So when you've got like wind driving moisture into your building, and your building is made of a porous sandstone, then you're going to get moisture in there. And there has been over the years some not very good repairs where cement has been used, and and it has resulted in a lot of the stone actually needing to be completely replaced. And although we don't really quarry any sandstones in Scotland anymore, you can sometimes get reclaimed stone, but there is some quarries working in England that are a very good source of replacement stone, and that is because they're also carboniferous and have been deposited in a very similar environment to the sandstones that we have used. So this, we know that Stanton Moor stone from Derbyshire was used for the renovation and repair works, and that was around about sort of 1999, 2000, but there has been some more recent works carried out since then. And just a quick overview of some of the other stones. So we do have some red sandstone there, but it is not your typical Permian sandstone that you're used to seeing, like the Kelvin Hall is built using Locher Briggs. This is actually an older one, which is a Devonian sandstone that comes from Dumbartonshire, from a quarry called Bonhill Quarry. And you can see in the old records as well that this was specified, so they did want it to come from Bonhill. But you also have decorative stones as well, so you've got a load of granite. So on the south approach there is some mull granite, and inside as well you have some sharp granite as well, which is very distinctive with its big feldspars there. But we do have some other material in the collections as well that was collected. So you can see on, this has got an old label on it here, Middle Coal Measures, Postle Series, Gilmore Hill Old Quarry. And what I really love about this one is that it was donated in 1870 by Mr. Robert Tow. And from the work that Joseph's done, we know that he was sort of the charge hand at one point. So he was one of the kind of head contractors who was working on there, and we know that we think his son as well was also working with them, which is quite nice, because I didn't know who that was until Joseph highlighted that, because it was one of the names that he'd managed to research. So yeah, you can see obviously you've got your typical lepidodendron, which is sort of very iconic of your carboniferous, and I don't know, maybe this was from part of the trees that they uncovered on the floor of the quarry, who knows. But yeah, it's quite nice because you still got a lot of the original carbon, the coal on there. And then there was also some vertebrate material as well, and this was found by John Young. You can see it's got his initials on the label there. So quite often in museums you do have to do a bit of detective work sometimes if you find material, or you can use things like handwriting to identify who may have collected if you don't actually have their name on there. So this is a bit of bone, which it was originally identified as a bit of rhizodont, but it was re-identified by Stan Wood as a bit of gyrocanthus. So you can see there that quite a big chunk of vertebrate material. And it's not obviously very pretty, it's not a complete articulated bit, but what I think is really cool about that is these sites, these quarries, quite often you actually just have nothing from quarries or collieries unless there was someone there that had an interest in actually preserving it. This is another bit we have in the store here, which is actually a bit of the masonry. And this was removed from the Gilbert Scott building during the renovations in about 2005. And there's a big calamites stem through there, which is not what you want in your masonry, because that is going to cause structural issues. So just going to go back to now onto the more recent stuff in your kind of boulder clay and your glacial deposits. So although the geology itself, the bedrock geology, is incredibly important, the actual kind of landscape itself was very much dictated by that more recent period of glaciation that we had in Scotland, where you get these drumlins forming, and you get these thick deposits of boulder clay, and these were quite extensive around about Glasgow. And one of the current things that I'm very obsessed with, and it's been keeping me up quite a lot, is these boulders. So John Young, who was the curator, he was really, really interested in the fact that there was, in the boulder clay, there were about 10 metres of overburden of this boulder clay, and he started to recognise that the different rock types that he was finding within there were not locally sourced, and he was starting to collect these, and he donated. So there's an old sort of annual report that states that he collected and donated over 200 of these specimens to the Hunterian collections. And at first I was only able to find one of them, but now I have found, I think, 43 altogether, and the National Museum of Scotland also have one on loan there. So it's been really nice trying to actually find these and just looking at the old labels as well. And there was a display at one point where they actually had these on display and were talking about just how far the ice had actually moved material. And there's quite a lot of difference. You've got some of your sedimentary stuff, and some of it can be sort of like we know that it came from probably like the Campsies or quite nearby, but other stuff would have come from a lot further, like Ben Leddy or Ben Lomond way. And I love these as well. So here we have two examples where you can actually see the glacial striations on the surface. There's an ironstone and a limestone there, which is really, really cool. And the site itself at the moment, so if anybody's been walking past where the Western Infirmary was, you'll notice that it is a construction site again, and they are building a new university building there, which is called the Keystone Building, which is part of this sort of campus redevelopment that they've been doing, and it's going to connect to the St Mungo Square, which is in there. So obviously when they're digging up big holes in the ground, I really wanted to go and have a wee look, and the site manager was very accommodating of me just being a weirdo and wanting to go and look at rocks, and he couldn't understand. So I went in, and they at this point were sort of digging up, and it's very, very messy. I've got some pictures I'll show you a bit later, and the whole thing, I was just walking around and I was just so excited to find lots of bits of rock that had glacial striations like lying about, and he's just looking at me like it's a muddy rock, like, and then he's like, but how do you know what that is? And he would just keep giving me rocks to get me to he's like, what's that? And he's like, but how do you know that? And I'm like, well, it's kind of my job to know that. So then we got talking, and he was saying that quite a lot of his staff, they ask him all the time what things are, and he doesn't often have any clue. So we are, hopefully he's going to let me go and talk to them and do some sort of outreach stuff and teach them a bit about the kind of geology and the things that they're actually looking at, because it's just really nice to be able to do that kind of shared engagement with them. But the site itself has seen a lot of activity. So these images are from the British Geological Survey's database, Geoscenic, which I think it might have actually changed its name in the last few weeks to, I don't know if anybody knows, it's like there's the something portal, I think, but if you Google Geoscenic, it should bring you to the right page. But it's a really good sort of database where there's a lot of old images and things that have been catalogued, and these are actually where in the Western site when they were building the new chemistry buildings. And I absolutely love that you can see some of the old coal workings. So this whole part of the West End, a lot of Glasgow is, there is huge big coal workings underneath, because they were following seams. In particular here, the Knightswood gas coal was one that they were very keen to exploit, so they quite often were sinking down to those workings. And you can see that they're on here just quite how much of the overburden of that boulder clay there is as well. And I don't know if anyone remembers the geological map that I sort of showed of the site, where there is a fault that runs through right where the Western Infirmary is, and the quarry workers do talk about how the sandstone at one side was way lower and on the other side was way easier to get to because of the displacement on that fault. And the chemistry building itself, apparently you could still get into the coal mine, so there was a shaft that you could get into from the chemistry building, which they actually did used to take students, geology students, to do for teaching, but I have been told by estates that it's been bricked up. and I'm not sure if I'm just being told that or not, but apparently it is no longer accessible, so unfortunately you can't get in. But there's a lot of tunnels underneath the university that are used by like engineering stuff for storage, but yeah, I'm still on a mission because I feel like they wouldn't have completely blocked it up. Probably, I don't know. I will find a way. I will report back if I make it in there. But yeah, so the kind of like whole thing with the geology and the Carboniferous, obviously, because there was coal and there was stuff with money, we did a lot of exploration, but we also done quite a lot of exploration around about here. So there's a load of boreholes being sunk quite recently as part of the new work that's getting done, just because of the scale of the building. But I came across these old boreholes in the store downstairs. So these are from, it's number 11 bore and number 10 bore, and I think these correlate to the ones that are on the old map where you have number 10 and number 11 bore. The more recent ones I've not actually been able to access because they are confidential at the moment. Which I'm presuming is because they've only been done quite recently and there is a current development, but I have asked if they will share those. But yeah, when I talk to people about, you know, what's kind of underneath the university, they're always quite surprised when I say, like, you know, there is big holes under there. Like, there's a lot, and there has been subsidence, so you will have bits which have already settled, but it is always something that, particularly as a geologist, I think about a lot, is just like, you know, is there a big void under there? And I know that some of the boreholes did hit voids, which is not what you want when you're building a building on it. And these are just more images, which is showing underneath the university in these kind of old coal seams that they were following. And you can see just from like the images and the sort of scale of the holes that it was not a nice job to be doing. So they obviously no longer exploit that there. But these are some pictures of the new development, which there does just look like a load of mud. So basically what they've been doing is they had to do a load of pile driving. So there was over 400 piles driven, done in the space of about 6 months, which is quite incredible. And that is partly because you've got not just a lot of glacial boulder clay, but you'll have a lot of backfill. So the site manager was telling me that when they started trying to dig out some of this backfill, they were finding hospital beds, all sorts of, like, just basically everything had been chucked in. And that obviously can create some hazards as well, because hospitals tend to have waste that you might not necessarily want to be disposing of. So they did have to do quite a lot of investigations just to make sure there was nothing, sort of no contamination, and from obviously like mine workings and things. But it's been really cool to go over and see, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to go over again in a couple of weeks. But what they are planning on doing, if anybody's interested, is they're going to try and create a viewing platform so people can actually be going in and seeing this as it's happening, because they really do want the kind of community and also the university community to kind of be part of that and see what's happening. And yeah, you can see the building in the backgrounds, which are the kind of new buildings. You can get onto the roof of one of those and get a really good view down into the site as well. So yeah, I think there's still another 5 or 6 years to go on that build, but yeah, I'm quite looking forward to seeing it progress. And yeah, they did let me they did dig down to bedrock at one point, and let me take some samples of, so they'd reached one of the black shales, and I've never been so excited. I could actually see some of it that was getting ripped up, because I've never seen shale that fresh, ever. Because normally, once stuff has been dug out of the ground and it starts to weather, you're always going to have that kind of slightly weathered rock, but this is like, it was such fresh shale, and there was a few fish scales and things, and it was just quite cool. So yeah, that's quite exciting to think about. And I'm going to stop that there, just in case people have questions, because I will just keep talking.